Today, I'm gonna eat a little humble pie. I'm gonna give Nikon massive kudos. I was wrong. They listened, and the Z9 Firmware 3.01 update proves it. Well, hey everybody, welcome to 2023, first ATS of 2023. We're going to talk a little bit about why I think Nikon deserves massive credit for firmware 3.01 for the Z9 and how it shows that they're listening to the consuming public. They've always been great with firmware and keeping older cameras updated. I haven't found them to always be as great at listening to the using public, particularly when it's a niche function in the camera that's being complained about. But this one, they listened, they acted fast. And I'm going to decipher a really poorly worded Nikon statement about what this firmware update does and make it a little more understandable for the general public, I think. They did exactly what I would have hoped that they did, and I need to eat a little humble pie because I said I doubted that they were going to do anything about it, and they did, and they deserve credit. Quickly, before we jump into that, want to give one last push for the office hours on January 10th, big free group photography get-together on Zoom and YouTube Live. We're going to be going through your best photos of 2022, so this is the last chance for me to push submissions to that. Make sure you go over to my website, hudsonhenry.com/office hours. You'll also find a link in this video's full description, along with links to all the videos and gear that I discuss in this particular video. Those will all be linked in the full description to this video. But you can sign up there and you can submit an image. There are submission guidelines. I ask you to read through it, one submission per person. We're going to go through your images. And the group of us that run the office hours, Rick, David, Woody, Darren, and I are going to pick our favorite image, the one we think most deserves a shout out, and give away a free Kase Wolverine magnetic circular polarizer, either an 82mm or 112mm if you're a person who uses those Nikon Trinity lenses like I do, the 14-24 with that amazing 112mm filter hood. So that's just up and out there. If you can't make the live meeting where it's going to be on Tuesday, January 10th, 10 a.m. Pacific, you can always watch it delayed on YouTube. It'll be up there in the live stream archive on YouTube. So sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours and submit that image. All right, I hope 2023 is as amazing as it looks like it's gonna be. We've got some awesome trips planned and I'm really excited about this year. We'll talk a little bit about the first big trip, which I'm actually packing for right now, when I'm done talking about the firmware. So, Z9 Firmware 3.01. Obviously a minor firmware update because it's a .01, not even a .05, .01. They made a quick move. That firmware is pretty new, firmware 3.0, and it did some changes particularly to improve 3D tracking's tracking accuracy when it loses a subject. And I'll talk a little bit about what I think they did in firmware 3.0, what I think they've tweaked in firmware 3.01 to improve a problem that some of us using hybrid handoff focus, which is something I've advocated along with a number of other people, to improve the way that integrates with their new changes to 3D tracking. So let me read you a line from the press release here. You know, the new firmware does several things to the camera, several minor little bug fixes. You know, there's a menu option for release timing indicator that if you put it into my menu, it wouldn't work right or be able to be removed. There's some FTP errors for people who use the camera, networking in, you know, those kinds of AP stringers and people working professionally with networks. Some subject detection stuff, some tweaks to wide area autofocus to just improve its accuracy. I've found it to be great, but I did notice, you know, just in some testing around the house with my kiddos and blurred Christmas tree with my 51.8, it did seem to be doing amazingly tracking subjects and picking up in wide area, maybe a little better than it used to be. But here's the meat. Here's where I think this firmware was rushed out to solve a problem people were complaining about, and I just want to thank Nikon for doing it. And be prepared. This is going to sound kind of unintelligible. I'll explain what I think it means after I read what they wrote, if you read the press release. In AF area mode plus AF on, recall shooting functions or recall shooting functions hold was assigned to a control using custom setting F2 custom control shooting settings. The camera would sometimes fail either to focus or to track the desired subject when autofocus was initiated by pressing the chosen control in focus mode AFC. All right, that sounds like maybe an engineer in Japan wrote it, it got translated by somebody and pushed straight out to the public. Here's the layman's interpretation of what that means. I went out and tested this with my kiddos. I'll show you a little footage from that in a second. Let me first explain what the hybrid focusing mode, hybrid focusing handoff. What do I mean when I say hybrid handoff focusing? Well, I have advocated, and I'm going to put a link up both in the description and one you can click here to a video I did, the most recent video about how I set up this hybrid handoff mode for action shooting. I keep it in one of my bank settings, and essentially I have a wide area focus as my default focusing in AFC, and I can pick up an erratically moving fast subject or one subject from a group of potential subjects by placing that wide area box over the subject that matters to me, or catching a fast or erratically moving subject like a bird in flight in that box. And then once the camera sees an eye, a face, a head, something that it can grasp, and you see that box pop up, you can transfer it with a press of the lens function button into a 3D tracking point using recall shooting functions hold. You map that button to a recall shooting functions hold where you select that to trigger the autofocus area to be 3D tracking plus autofocus on. So it locks that subject once it's picked up, and now you have a 3D box that can move all over the frame outside that wide area box you used to initially pick it up. It's a way to capture a quick erratic moving subject or one of several subjects with the box, then lock it to a 3D tracking point and let it travel all over the frame. Firmware 3.0, they improved 3D tracking. They proved particularly what happens when it loses the subject for a second. And instead of the past where it kind of jumped around having a hard time finding the subject again, it moved to auto area where it searched near where that 3D tracking point had been for another subject. If it lost it, it kind of incorporated some of the power of auto area autofocusing like we use a lot with the Z6 and Z7, Z6 II, Z7 II, Z50, ZFC, Z30. It's actually quite powerful, that auto area autofocus, and it tends to do a little bit of a close subject priority search if there's nothing selected in the frame. But this new improvement that they did looked close around the tracked 3D point. The problem was if you were using the recall shooting functions hold handoff from wide area to 3D tracking, what we're calling hybrid handoff focusing for erratically moving subjects, like a lot of us shooting action and wildlife really love to do with the Z9, and you hadn't locked a point. If you were just going from the wide area bracket and hadn't seen a face, it hadn't seen eyes, you hadn't seen a little box show up around the eyes that you locked in wide area and then switched to 3D tracking, it would then assume there was no point. The wide area box was just ignored with firmware 3.0 if there wasn't a locked subject inside it, face, eyes, head, torso, a vehicle. And instead it would search all over the frame using auto area. And so the problem is, if you were using the box to try to pick up a subject that's more distant than a closer subject, and the closer subject isn't what you want to track, but you hadn't locked it in any way, and then you went to do the handoff from wide area to 3D, it would instead use auto area all over the frame, not just inside the box, and select that closer subject. I did a video about it, and it wasn't as big a problem for me as some other people because I didn't tend to try to switch if I didn't have a locked subject. If it hadn't detected my subject and automatically started tracking and locking it inside the box, I didn't hand it off to 3D. I stayed with the wide area, or in certain situations where there wasn't motion, say a bird perched near a nest and the wide area wasn't picking it up, I'd switch to single point and put my point on the bird and lock it that way through another function button. So, all right, enough of that. People really had a hard time with this because apparently a lot of people had gotten used to using the 3D tracking or the wide area box and just switching to 3D tracking, and it would continue to search in the prior version before 3.0 close around where the box was. Now it's looking all over the frame. What Nikon did was changed that handoff so that now it still uses that amazing new kind of integration of auto area autofocus with 3D tracking acquisition, but it limits it to look for a subject inside that wide area box when you go to do the handoff. So no longer will it look all over the frame. And I did a little testing with my kiddos, and in just shooting some photos of them in front of our Christmas tree with my 51.8, wide open, low light. I found the wide area was working just stupendously at picking them up. I mean, I think, yes, that this new firmware improves the wide area tracking. And you can differentiate which one of them you want to capture with the wide area. But then the handoff is smooth as it has always been, but I did a little test where I put the box over the Christmas tree and had my daughter Pepper stand to the right. And I switched to 3D tracking with my hybrid handoff mode with the box over the Christmas tree. Now, in firmware 3, before they did this update, it would have immediately saw that Pepper was closer in the frame. I don't have a subject that I'm tracking. The Christmas tree is not a detectable subject. So it would have jumped immediately to lock one of Pepper's eyes, given that she's closer than the tree to me, and she's, it would have gone to auto area, looked for her, found her, locked her. Now it's ignoring her, and it's only looking in the box to find a subject to lock with 3D tracking. So that's the simple explanation of what they've done, is limit that search for a new subject to inside the box when you do the hybrid handoff. It's a perfect solution to the problem, and it really shows Nikon is listening to the public. There's nothing you need to change if you're using that hybrid autofocusing technique, the hybrid handoff technique. Again, I linked the video in this video's full description where I showcase how exactly I set that up and run through the menus on my most current way that I use that with my lens function buttons on my longer lenses. Nikon has been great with firmware updates, running all the way back. They're much better than other camera companies, big names that we know, in my opinion, at keeping older cameras as up-to-date as they possibly can. And think back to some of the changes that they've recently done to the D500 and D800 to include some of the live view capabilities that they've pioneered with the mirrorless cameras, as well as updating them for compact flash express B cards and other things that they've done. Just massive kudos to them for their backwards compatibility and keeping older cameras up to date, but also in listening to us about this problem with hybrid focusing. I kind of thought, well, it's not really something designed, it's not something written about in the manual. This hybrid handoff autofocusing is more of a hack driven by bloggers and YouTubers and professionals in the field and workshop leaders like myself. But enough people spoke that Nikon listened, and they got that firmware out fast, and they deserve massive congratulations. So if you haven't tried the hybrid handoff autofocus and you like to shoot action, you really should. It's pretty fantastic. All right, so enough of all that. I'm packing for Baja. I'm super excited. I hope to see all of you in the office hours to go through the best photos of 2022 on Tuesday the 10th, 10 a.m. Pacific. Remember to sign up and submit a photo at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. We have workshops up for 2023. They sold out basically the instant that they were listed. We still are about to list, or maybe just by the time this video comes out, have listed the Newport, Oregon, Central Oregon Coast Workshop. That's going to be amazing. We'll be right by Thor's Well. There's refuges, lighthouses, beautiful sea stacks and waves. It's going to be a great workshop. So that'll go quickly as well. That's going to be in late summer on the Oregon coast. It'll be a really wonderful time. So also, we had 2 people cancel on our second Cuba trip. We filled up a first Cuba trip, offered a second Cuba trip this spring. If you're interested in coming to Cuba with Rick and I, it's going to be an amazing trip. We're going to be in Havana as well as Viñales, a very amazing cultural and photographic tour of a spectacular place filled with really cool people. So if you're interested in that, jump over to hudsonhenry.com/workshops, check it out. I'm sure those 2 new slots that opened will fill fast. All right, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying this new year, still reveling in food and family and the fun of the holidays, staying safe, staying creative. We'll see you next week.